Hi, my name is Sean Lazar, and I want to talk to you about assurance of salvation. A lot of people wonder, how can I be sure that I'm going to go to heaven when I die? How can I be sure I'm going to spend eternity with God instead of eternity apart from God? Not knowing the answer to that question can be pure agony, because this really is probably the most important question that you can answer in life. Because everything that you do here in this life pretty much pales in comparison to if you're going to the wrong place in the next life. So how can you have assurance of salvation? And more basically, what is assurance anyways? A lot of people aren't sure what they know about what assurance is. But what assurance is very, very simple. It's a belief. It's a belief in this conclusion: I have everlasting life. If you believe that you have everlasting life, then you have assurance. That's what assurance of salvation is. I have everlasting life, or the equivalent. You don't need to believe these exact words. You can believe something like, I'm going to go to heaven when I die. I'm going to spend eternity with God. I'm justified before God. Whatever the equivalent concept of this is, if you believe it, then you have assurance. Assurance is a belief. It's a belief in a particular proposition about where you're going to spend eternity. Assurance is not a feeling. A lot of people kind of confuse. We live in a touchy-feely culture where people, instead of offering their opinion when a teacher asks a question in class, they say, I feel like, instead of saying, I think the answer is, they say, I feel like. So we live in a touchy-feely culture where emotions kind of take precedence over knowledge. But assurance is a knowledge. It's a type of thinking. It's to think that you have everlasting life. So for example, if my grandmother died, I'd be very, very sad because I'm very close to my grandmother. But I would still have assurance because I would still believe I have everlasting life. Even though I was emotionally blue, I would still have assurance. Or let's say my daughter graduated from preschool and I had that typical parental reaction of just feeling pride and joy at this accomplishment, graduating preschool. I was really joyful at that moment. But I still had assurance because I believed the proposition I have everlasting life. So you can believe this is true and have assurance no matter what you're feeling. You might feel scared, you might feel angry, you might feel sad, you might feel happy, you might not feel much at all, but you can still have assurance of salvation because assurance is a belief, not a feeling. Now here's the big question. How do you get to this conclusion? Not everybody who gets to that conclusion deserves to get to that conclusion, you might say. There's a difference between true assurance and false assurance. And the difference between true assurance and false assurance depends entirely on the reasoning process that leads you to that conclusion. So let me give you an example. Let's say a Muslim might have assurance of their salvation. They might reason this way. Whoever blows themselves up in the cause of Allah will go to paradise when they die. I'm going to blow myself up, therefore I'm going to paradise when I die. Now, he has assurance of a salvation because he believes that he's going to go to paradise when he dies. So he has assurance. But it's a false assurance because the premises, that's what P1 and P2 stand for. P1 is the first premise, P2 is the second premise. The premises his assurance is based on are false. They're false because Allah doesn't exist. They're false because martyring yourself is not a ticket into heaven. So those are false premises. So even though he has assurance, he believes that he's going to go to paradise when he dies. That's false assurance because the premises it's based on are false. Now, that's an example from Islam. What about Christians? Well, Christians base their assurance on false premises all the time. And so it's important to know what the right premises to base your assurance on are. Here's an example of a false premise. And all of these have, not only the premises are false, but also the reasoning is false. So there's a fallacy called the fallacy of affirming the consequent. And here's an example of that fallacy. Let's say you reason this way. All tripods have 3 legs. My dog has 3 legs. Therefore, my dog is a tripod. Now, obviously, something went wrong in the reasoning there, and what went wrong is you've committed the fallacy of affirming the consequent. The problem is, being a tripod is not the only explanation for why your dog might have 3 legs. There's lots of explanations for why your dog might have 3 legs. Maybe he was in an accident and a car ran over his leg and had to be removed. Maybe he was born that way. He was just born deformed. Or maybe he got cancer and a surgeon had to remove that leg. There's lots of reasons why your dog might have 3 legs. Being a tripod is not the only explanation, although that's not even really a plausible explanation in itself. Well, how do Christians commit that kind of fallacy in their thinking? Well, let me give you an example of John Wesley and a lot of Mormons. John Wesley reasoned this way. Saved people have a strange warming in their heart. I had a strange warming in my heart, therefore I'm saved. Isn't that what Mormons believe too? They have this strange warming in their heart, and so they conclude from that they're saved. So the object of their assurance is what? This experience of the strange warming in their heart. But they commit, so first of all, that's we can argue about the premises, but just the reasoning itself is false. Because there's lots of reasons why you might have a strange warming in your heart. Being saved isn't the only one. You might have had some especially spicy salsa. You might have heartburn. You might be having a heart attack. Your iPad in your pocket might be overheating. There's lots of reasons why you might have a strange warming in your heart. Being saved is not the only explanation. So that's false assurance. They might come to this conclusion, well, I'm saved, I have eternal life. But the reasoning is false and the premises are false. So that's false assurance. Here's another example. Someone might say, saved people have a desire to read the Bible. I have a desire to read the Bible, therefore I'm saved. Again, that's the fallacy of affirming the consequent. There's lots of reasons why you might have a desire to read the Bible, and being saved isn't the only one. So you can't be sure that you're saved on account of that evidence. Maybe you just have an interest in reading religious literature, so you read the Bible. Maybe you just have an interest in completing your degree, and the last class you take is a Bible class, and so you have an interest in reading the Bible because of that, because you want to get your degree. Maybe you're reading the Bible because, like the Pharisees, you're trying to earn your salvation, so you're searching in the Scriptures for the rules you need to follow in order to earn your salvation. So there's lots of explanations for why you might be reading the Bible. Being saved isn't the only one. Here's another example. People might reason this way. Saved people stop drinking. I stop drinking, therefore I'm saved. Again, that's fallacy of affirming the consequent. There's lots of reasons why you may have stopped drinking. Maybe your doctor said if you continue drinking, you're going to die. You're going to get a heart attack. Maybe just social pressure at work. They say you're going to lose your job if you don't stop drinking. So you stop drinking. Being saved isn't the only explanation. So that commits the fallacy of affirming the consequent. So how can we get to this conclusion and it be the right way? The conclusion, I have everlasting life. Well, the answer, I think, is very, very simple. The object of your faith is what Jesus promised to believers. And this is from John 6:47. Jesus said, whoever believes in me has everlasting life. So let's put that as our first premise. Whoever believes in Jesus has, that's present possession, everlasting life. So that's your first premise. Jesus' promise of salvation. Whoever believes in him has everlasting life. So it's a conditional promise. It's in the subjunctive. If you meet the condition, that is, believes, then you have what he promises, everlasting life, as a present possession, not as an uncertain future reward, but as a present possession at the moment of faith. If you believe that, that'll be the second premise. I believe. Therefore, what can you conclude? Whoever believes in Jesus has everlasting life. I believe. Therefore, I have everlasting life. There you have assurance, and it's assurance based on Jesus' promise. Some people would say, and we would say that assurance is the essence of saving faith. Because the moment you believe this promise, you have to have assurance, because that's what you're believing. You have to have assurance that you have everlasting life, because that's the promise that you're believing, that whoever believes has everlasting life. If you understand and believe that, you have to come to this conclusion. Now let's say you've heard the promise and you've understood it, but you still lack assurance. Why would that be? Well, let's think of it this way. Whoever believes in Jesus has everlasting life. Well, maybe here there's a problem, and you'd say, but I don't know if I believe. If you don't know what you believe, then what conclusion would you come to? Whoever believes in Jesus has everlasting life? I don't know if I believe, therefore, I don't know if I have everlasting life. See? If you don't know that, if you believe in that promise, then you're not going to have assurance. Maybe that's something you've been struggling with, in which case I would strongly urge you to believe in what Jesus said. Just simply believe that promise. Don't look to anything else. Just look to that promise and keep reading it until you believe it. Here's another possibility. Someone might come and say, Jesus says, whoever believes in Jesus has everlasting life, or believes in me has everlasting life. And you might say, I don't believe that. Therefore, what would you conclude? Therefore, I don't have everlasting life. Again, you would lack assurance. So, the only way to have assurance is to just believe what Jesus has promised. Now, I should say something at this point, and that's that not every Christian church believes this promise, and they don't teach it. What they teach is that salvation is a future possibility based on your performance now. So, they don't teach that everlasting life is a present possession of believers. They don't even teach that salvation is through believing. They teach that salvation is earned through the works that you do, through your faithfulness, through how good you are in life. And they'll say something like this, whoever is better than average, or whoever is a good person will be saved. And then you're supposed to say, well, I'm a good person, therefore I'm going to be saved. A lot of people reason that way, and they have false assurance because salvation by works is a false gospel. It's a false premise. But a lot of people believe that, and they look at their life and they think to themselves, I really don't know if I'm good enough. And I might be pretty good now, but I certainly don't know if I'm going to be good enough tomorrow or a year from now or 10 years from now. I might be a really bad person 10 years from now. And so they lack assurance because they've been taught a gospel of salvation by works, where you have to persevere in faith and good works until the end of your life. And they have no idea if they're going to do that. They have no idea if they're going to be good and faithful until the rest of their life, until the end of their life. And so they lack assurance. Do you see, brothers and sisters, why it's so important to simply understand and believe Jesus' promise? This is the good news. This is the thing that you should base your assurance on. Jesus' promise that whoever believes in him has everlasting life. If you believe that promise, then you can get to the conclusion, I have everlasting life. This is a true conclusion because the premises are true. It's a sound conclusion because this is just a deductive syllogism. It's the most basic form of reasoning. So the conclusion follows from the premises, and the premises are true. Therefore, your assurance is genuine assurance. If you don't have assurance of your salvation, would you believe in Jesus' promise today? If you're struggling with your assurance, this is what I recommend that you do. Go to the Gospel of John, and I want you to read, especially the first 12 chapters. Pay attention to every time Jesus makes the promise of eternal life. Some popular ones are John 3:16, John 3:36, John 5:24. And also this conversation that Jesus has with Martha in John chapter 11, when he asks her if she believes in him for eternal life. And she answered yes. Will you answer yes too? If you have, then you have assurance. And you'll know that you're going to spend eternity with God. If you don't have assurance yet, keep on studying, especially the Gospel of John. Put your faith in Jesus' words. And that way, you too can have assurance.